Good morning. Hey, this is David Benson with Cornhusker Hybrids in Lincoln, Nebraska, where our mantra and trademark is success starts with the seed. No truer words have ever been spoken in this business. Anywhere you go in the world, germplasm is not as good as it should be. It needs to be better, and everything starts with the seed, good, bad, or otherwise. Today, I'm going to divert back a little bit to something I started last fall with this plant breeding commandment series. And I said when I started, I didn't know how many commandments I was going to have, what they were going to be, and anything else. I just started out saying things that I thought you needed to do. Number one, starting with clean seed. Today, I'm going to add what I'm going to call plant breeding commandment number 8, which is, thy must select for drought tolerance. It's the number one trait in every crop, everywhere crops are grown in the whole entire world. The number one trait. Any crop, anywhere, anytime must have drought tolerance because it can be under drought stress, heat stress, water stress. And so drought tolerance is the number one most important trait anywhere in the world, in any crop. And then within that, you got to think about water use efficiency, like how the minimum water you have is partitioned for that plant so it can survive, because those plants are going to do every single thing they can do to survive. They're going to do it. They're going to try as hard as they can. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But so, drought tolerance, any crop. What does that mean? It just means when it gets hot and dry, your cultivars hang in there longer. They persist better. They don't show as much change during the day. We have, a lot of people don't know it, but modern maize is bred so that the leaves will roll up and you can have more relative humidity inside that leaf on a hot day. And those are bulliform cells. If anybody wants to study it, it's absolutely a trait in maize that you have to have for hot days. And you'll see it when your plants look like pineapples out there on a really hot day, and the next morning you come by and the leaves are out. My old stepfather years ago used to say, the leaves can roll up in the day, but if they're still rolled up in the morning, you have a lot of trouble, and then you're headed for blue death. But anyway, drought tolerance. Any crop, whether it's turf grass has got to be drought tolerant. My lawn has to be drought tolerant here in Nebraska. As a matter of fact, we choose drought tolerant varieties when we plant our lawns here because we're in a semi-arid environment and it costs a lot to water your lawn and so on. And if you have a drought tolerant lawn, it just kind of goes dormant. It'll just sit there and then it'll come back. And so those are things you got to think about. So the crop you're working with, you've got to know the drought tolerance. You have to evaluate so you can determine the drought tolerance, however that is, whether that's just certain environments, comparison to the checks, or whether that's full-scale drought tests like we used to, like Pioneer did in Nebraska. Originally in the 50s, they came into Nebraska where the rain-fed area blended into the irrigated area, and that's where they established their research station at York in the 50s. The whole point was for drought tolerance, and it worked that way and probably still is, although agriculture has changed the same, crops have changed a lot. Maize yields significantly more under severe stress than it used to, but they set up what they called limited irrigation side-by-sides where you had the hybrids in one experiment in the field that were, the water was controlled, and the other part of the field you got full maximum genotypic, and you separated that by a small amount, and that's the way you developed your products. Most people in the world that work with drought tolerance in maize, they have specialized experiments and special stations and special ways to monitor their water where they test. For instance, Syngenta, when they were developed in their artesian hybrids a decade ago, did the majority of their testing in eastern Colorado, where it's just a natural area that doesn't rain very much. The water's moving over the mountains. It has a way of bypassing it. It was a great place to put a station, and they had a very excellent setup there where they controlled the water. They knew everything. Same way with Monsanto in Gothenburg, Nebraska. They had a grow out shelter or a rain out shelter where you physically had a building with a roof that you could run with electric motors and cover your crop so it couldn't rain on it. And that's one of the big things when you are doing drought tolerance is you don't want a lot of rain or you don't learn anything. But anyways, you have to have drought tolerance. And drought kind of comes, when you think of drought, you think of high temperatures, no rain. And that is truly what a drought is. Above average temperatures with no rainfall, and then it just depends on, what your subsoil moisture was when you started, and a lot of other things, till you just run out of water. And remember one very important thing here, if I'm a teacher putting my foot on the floor, there is no such thing as drought resistance in crops. There is no drought resistance in maize. There's only drought tolerance. Maize itself has a tipping point, as many other crops do, around reproductive time, which we call V15 to R1, when the tassel is emerging from the stalk and the ear is putting on silk. And you have to have viable pollen, you have to have receptive silk. When it's hot and dry, in my opinion, it hurts the silk emergence a lot worse than it hurts the quality of the pollen, because it's got to be extremely hot to kill pollen, and most tassels will start shedding in the morning before it gets to those high temperatures. But receptive silk, when those silks start looking like little rubber things and they don't grow overnight, that is a real issue in reproduction in maize. So more often than not, it's silk delay rather than dead pollen that affects the production in seed fields. And it takes extreme heat to kill pollen. And as long as your anthers open earlier in the day, they don't wait till it's 103 degrees to open. So I still go with receptive silks are more often the problem than people think. And that's when it's extremely hot, particularly at night. Hot nighttime temperatures in maize are really a problem anytime, but in that V15, V14 to R1, R2, when you're developing, when you're fertilizing, when you're having sex, plants are having sex, when they're getting fertilized, the embryo's getting fertilized with the sperm cells, and when that plant is rapidly growing, you have to have water. Lack of water there is barren ears, you're done. So just keep that in mind. Also, your water use efficiency is like, if you have this limited water, how does the plant partition that out between reproductive stages, vegetative stages, and how does that affect the physiology of the plant? It can affect us enormously. If you have really dry conditions early, you can get in maize what we call beer can syndrome, where you just get these little short ears. I call them beer cans. It is a problem. It can reduce yields, and it does. But if you get rain later in the season, it can come, not those ears, but it can improve. It is a bad deal. You don't want it. And I mean, you got to have planting conditions where it physically doesn't like rain for a month. The corn comes up and then it just doesn't rain, and then it comes out of it later, and you get those little we call beer can syndrome. That'll happen when it's dry early and it eventually recovers. Also, back in the day, we had a location up what we called Belgrade, and we would get almost several years in a row, we got drought up there enough, and when you get early drought and it stays dry, but the crop hangs in there and keeps going, in maize, it'll be much shorter, noticeably shorter. The leaves will be noticeably smaller. But if you get some rain later, you can get some corn, but if you don't, you're done early. So in maize, and the crop I work with, it's extremely, there is no drought resistance. There's only drought tolerance in varying measures. You can select for it, absolutely. You can breed for it, absolutely, because there's differences genetically. And you can test for it, absolutely, if you want to, and you take the time and you're set up to where you can really do it. And you have to realize that if you're trying to do drought trials and you have to get the rainiest day ever, year ever, probably not going to sort of make any deals there. So another thing you just have to be aware of is, like I say, drought is normally high temperature, no rain. But you can also get your high temperature, and if you put on irrigation, you could raise like maybe the greatest crops ever. In 2012 in Nebraska, if you look at the long-term corn yield traits, you'll see a huge outlier in 2012. I was in Indiana that year. It didn't rain from like March 1st until July. And I mean, we raised nothing. Here back in Nebraska, they had the same situations, but we have center pivots and we have a lot of irrigation. And even that year was one of the hottest summers on record, had some of the greatest corn yields in Nebraska ever. So if you have irrigation, it's just like if you're going to try to grow corn, let's just say in Saudi Arabia. Actually, they do it, I think, places. And in the desert, in Arizona. But you have to have water. You can have high temp and still raise corn, but you can't have low water. You have to have moisture. So I just like to close this today by saying that absolutely anywhere that you breed anything, any crop, your number one trait that you should be concerned with is as much drought tolerance. And you can't have plants that grow like pineapples. You've got to have products that still, if it's not dry, they produce. If it's dry, they produce. And that takes selection and that takes work. And I wish you the best. Remember, whether you're pollinating, harvesting, or planting, that this is a great job. We can mess up 99% of the time. You find a great cultivar, your company finds a few great cultivars, and you can do really well. So I wish you all well. This is Plant Breeding Commandment number 8. Thou must breed and select for drought tolerance. Have a great week. Bye.